Hello, and welcome to Kiowa Arts and Culture's 2023 Project Support Panel. I'm India Pierre Ingram, and I'm here with fellow CAC staff, Jania Stakal, Julia Murphy, Laura Matteo, and Jake Sinatra. For audiences joining us online, you can find the captioning by clicking the live transcription button at the bottom of your page and then press show subtitles. I'll also put this in the chat. Thank you to our panelists for serving on our interactive public panel, learning about our process, applicants, and funding criteria. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. Cuyahoga Arts and Culture is the local public funder for arts and culture in Cuyahoga County. Our mission is to inspire and strengthen the community by investing in arts and culture. The goal of our project support grant making is to promote public access and encourage the breadth of arts and cultural programming in our community by supporting Cuyahoga County-based projects. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that the land that we stand on and the place that we call Cuyahoga County is land that was claimed by the United States government through force, displacement, and treaties negotiated in bad faith. We acknowledge those of the Shawnee, Miami, Erie, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Haudenosaunee Confederacy whose lands we stand on, and the thousands of Native Americans representing over 100 tribes who currently live in Northeast Ohio today. We want to thank the Lake Erie Native American Council for providing us the information to develop this land acknowledgement. We also want to take a moment to lift up CAC's value of equity. We choose to lead with racial equity in our work because the creation and perpetuation of racial inequalities is embedded into government and grant making. We confront the white supremacy that resides in our work because racial inequities across all indicators of success are deep and pervasive. We also recognize the power and potential that organizations who produce arts and cultural programming have as bearers of culture. These institutions have the power to write the narrative about who belongs and who is valued. We encourage our organizations to connect with resources to advance equity in your own work. Visit CAC Grants/equity to learn more. I'd like to now introduce our Director of Grant Making Strategy and Communications, Jake Sinatra, with some words for our panelists and applicants. Jake.
Thank you so much, India. And on behalf of the CAC, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to our panelists for their service today. We thank you for your willingness to help us bring to life this open and transparent process, which is crucial to how we do our work and how we bring arts and culture to Cuyahoga County residents through the nonprofits that we fund. Today, you, our panelists, are an extension of our team. You help us live our values through this process, and we look forward to learning from you and with you today. Project support, as India noted, is about supporting the breadth and depth of arts and culture in our community. And so we also want to say thank you to our applicants, whose work is diverse and really spans CAC's broad definition of arts and culture, for all of their efforts throughout this process. Lastly, I just extend a thank you to my team for their work over the past year on the policies, the guidelines, and the hours of technical assistance that they've done to get us to today. So thank you, and looking forward to this conversation. I'll turn it back to you, India.
Great, thank you, Jake. So now we're going to turn it over to, at this point, I'll ask each panelist to introduce themselves. Please share your name and your gender pronouns, where you're located, and your professional connection to arts and culture. I'll paste an order in the chat to keep it moving.
My name is Melissa Aston. My pronouns are she and her. I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee. I am the manager of grants for Arts Build.
My name is Mark Cardwell, and my pronouns are he and him. I am the founder and the principal consultant for Cardwell Communications, and I've been working in arts marketing for a long time, about 30 years or so, and have done quite a bit. So,
My name is Lisa Harper Chang, and my pronouns are she and her. And I actually am coming from Huntsville, Alabama. So Melissa, a neighbor of yours, sort of. And I come as a social worker who's worked in the arts and community and nonprofit space. So I worked for the Pulitzer Foundation for the Arts and also worked for a regional funder in the Midwest. And I now am currently a senior associate consultant at Evolve Giving Group, doing nonprofit fundraising consulting.
My name is Asif Majid. He, him, his. I'm based in Hartford, Connecticut, which is Tungus land. And I am an independent artist and also teach theater and human rights at the University of Connecticut. Looking forward to this.
Great. Thank you all for those great introductions. And again, welcome. And now I'll walk through how the review process will work for those following the live stream. As the panel chair, I will introduce each applicant organization and project. I'll then lead the panel through a discussion focusing on each of our funding criteria at a time. Panelists will be invited to comment on applications in relations to the funding criteria. We'll have 3 minutes for public benefit, 2 for artistic and cultural vibrancy, and 2 for organizational capacity. Our panel co-chair, Jania, will keep us on track with time using the PowerPoint on the screen. We have allocated about 8 minutes for each application. To keep things moving smoothly, panelists should plan to come off mute to indicate that they like to be the next to speak. I may also call on panelists to speak if need be. After we go through the criteria, the panelists will submit their scores, which will be tabulated by CAC staff. So how can you engage as an audience member, or if you have questions for panel or you have a correction? To our applicants, please do not contact or address the panel in any manner during the deliberations, electronically or otherwise. If an applicant believes that a panelist has presented incorrect information regarding their application, they should complete the information correction form, which is available at cacgrants.org/live and within the audience guide. CAC staff will review the correction form to determine if it is an objective correction of misinformation. If it is, the panel chair will read the correction to the panel and for the public. An example of objective misinformation would be a panelist misstating the number of performances detailed in an application. This is an opportunity to clarify what was submitted with the application, not to provide additional information. After the panel is complete, audience members are encouraged to participate in the public comment session by submitting comments via our online form at cacgrants.org/live. The deadline to submit comments is the conclusion of the project support panel deliberation on Tuesday, September 20th. Application scores and panel comments are not discussed at this time. Now, let's get started with our first review. I'll give panelists a moment to pull up our first application is going to be BorderLight Festival. I'll give you a moment to pull up that application as I read the project title. For their project title, The Debut of BorderLight Mini Fringe. And the project is the BorderLight Festival presents a large biennial festival. BorderLight Mini will occur in alternating years, turning BorderLight into an annual festival. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is an organization's ability to meaningfully and authentically engage its community through its project?
I can give this a whirl. For me, this was sort of like right towards the upper part of the fair category on public benefit. I saw that 70% of proceeds were going to artists, which I appreciated in terms of the definition of the community. It was also good to see that they were providing sound and tech support as well as travel stipends, performance stipends, and housing for out-of-town artists, which I appreciated seeing as well. A 50-50 split of local and national performers was the orientation in terms of who they were trying to bring on, which I thought was great. I would have loved to see a little bit more around sort of how they were thinking about what it meant by a diverse panel of who was approving and selecting the performers. Aside from hiring a Black-owned / led marketing firm, it was not quite clear to me what was meant by the idea of a diverse panel that would be approving and selecting performers. And I also want to caution and invite the applicants to think a little bit about the difference between what international constitutes relative to what diverse might mean, right? These are not necessarily equivalent terms. And to kind of think about the implications of how we're orienting one compared to the other. And last for me on public benefit was I thought accessibility was generally high, at least on the economic side, with free or pay what you can shows.
new or differing perspectives?
I'll jump in. I thought that the sheer size of the event really kind of lended itself to the fact that it would have a public benefit. And again, just to echo, I thought the pricing options did make it very accessible in the fact that there was outdoor as well as indoor programming.
I also wanted to add, I appreciate the comments of my previous panelists. I felt like it was sort of on the lower end of strong in terms of public benefit. I liked that they were intentional about their choice of contractor, that I like where they started with community meetings, and would love to see more evidence of sort of how that will lead to power sharing and engagement through steps like that as they continue to grow. I just had a couple of notes that probably kept me from scoring it, a little stronger, and it has more to do with how things were phrased. So there was one statement, I think, in the intro that said Cleveland is the poorest big city in the country. And that just from a standpoint, I just wanted to know sources, or I wanted something more specific than that. I felt that was a very broad statement to make. And then there was one other, I know I'm getting very nitpicky, but there was a sentence where I don't think you meant it to do this, but this is how I ended up reading it, that it had the danger of conflating Blackness with needing free performances. And so I just wanted to caution you in terms of just making sure that you're being very intentional about separating those statements and you're very clear, because I don't want that to be misread, because reading all your other information, I don't think that's what you meant, but that's kind of just how that one statement read to me.
Great. If there's no other additional comments, we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criteria, which is an organization's ability to create a quality project that inspires and challenges its community. Melissa, any thoughts here? Oh, I see Mark's.
Oh, you saw that. Yeah, I thought the project did indeed include the participation of a diverse group of voices and experiences, which I think is important. And it also appears as though the artistic performers are intentionally diverse to reflect the community dynamic, which is something I always look for, is to make sure that organizations are mindful of mirroring the communities that they are in. And I also found that it was indeed decided by a diverse team of arts and culture professionals that seemed eminently qualified. So.
Great. Mark, can you connect that back to the scoring framework? So if it was in
Yeah.
the strong category or fair for you?
Yes, I had them in the strong category for that.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I also, go ahead.
Oh, I was also going to speak similarly to what Mark is conveying. It appears that they are being very forthright and trying to be reflective of their community faces. And I scored them within the strong category of that. Diverse faces from skin color, race, background, sexual orientation, and things of that nature.
Great. Lisa?
Yeah, I agree. I scored them in the strong category as well for artistic and cultural vibrancy. A lot of that is, I think, so much thought and care has gone into the professional development as well of the artists. And I think that was really beautiful to see, and would just love to see a more formalized feedback mechanism, but that's, true always. So, but nice job on this part.
One brief comment for me. They were also in the strong category for me. I had a question that I didn't quite gather information about this from the application. Would have loved to know more if these neighborhoods are where the performances are being held are actually the areas that need the developmental or economic impact. It was not quite clear to me if that connection was being made or if or how. That isn't to say that they don't. I just don't know, and I would have loved to kind of have just a little bit more information to make that connection clear. But still, for me, in the strong category.
Great, thank you. We're moving on to the next category, which is organizational capacity, which is an organization's ability to successfully plan and manage its project.
I'll jump in if that's all right.
Of course.
Okay, where I kind of felt with this one, as opposed to the other two categories, is I did have some concern that the organization currently has an acting ED, and in their writing indicated some concern over being able to retain staff. So that actually is a concern for such a large events and things like that. The current team does seem to have set a realistic budget with achievable goals, but I had to, in my mind, score them in the upper part of the fair category for this capacity.
Agreed, all around, also upper fair. For me, so I think I read something that Mark raised slightly differently, which I actually partially thought that they were putting this festival together in a way to retain some of the staff that they might potentially lose in this kind of like every 2-year cycle of the festival, of the regular international festivals that they have. But otherwise agreed with the rest of the questions around organizational capacity things. Otherwise, being strong and budget seems appropriate.
Yes, I scored that one similar to both of them, a high fair on the same reasons of strength of staff and the breadth of the project. I think they can get it done, but there was concern there.
And I had it at sort of low strong. Before I do share the concerns of my colleagues here, I thought they did provide a reasonable and actually a nice explanation of what they would do if the funding didn't come through, and I appreciated their supplemental links. I thought they were helpful.
Great, and that concludes our time for BorderLight Festival. Panelists, please submit your scores, and then we'll turn next to Cleveland Chamber Choir in just a moment, but we'll give you a moment to change any of your scores or press submit. Great. Our next application is from Cleveland Chamber Choir for the project titled Of Sound Mind from Darkness into Light. The Of Sound Mind, Darkness into Light project will consist of 2 concerts devoted to music about issues of mental health, including depression and neurodivergency. The Cleveland Chamber Choir will partner with area mental health agencies in promoting these concerts and bringing their mission and needs to the community's attention. Would someone like to get us started around public benefit?
I, in terms of public benefits, scored them a very strong. It's very apt for the current times in relation to the pandemic and the repercussions of the pandemic. So they're kind of touching on a very vibrant topic right now that I think their community members will respond to very well.
So for me, this application on public, in terms of public benefit, was actually in the upper fair area for me. And while I appreciated what Melissa said about the strong integration of sort of issues around mental health as it relates to the pandemic, and particularly an integration of composers from neurodivergent backgrounds and performances that address these types of issues, there were a couple of concerns that I had that prevented me from moving it into the strong category. So one of which was the idea of having free concerts. I think is great, all for it, always here for it. But to me, the equivalence that was then made was that would then hope in the result of there being new audience members. And that to me was not enough work to be able to demonstrate that this was actually a project that was rightfully in the strong part of the category. It wasn't clear what the outreach would be. It wasn't clear what kinds of communities would be engaged to be able to have a different kind of audience base. And I was also quite troubled by the idea that the organization is looking for the, and I quote here, best local vocalists who have studied music. I don't know what that means for someone to be the best local vocalist. I don't know what that standard means. You know, we know, for example, that CAC itself has moved away from the language of artistic excellence in its grant making kind of like, you know, criteria, and many grantors have done that as well, partially because the standards by which we're holding around what constitutes the best are often white supremacist cultural standards. And so I'm wondering if this organization is thinking about the integration of, you know, reaching out to sort of like Black churches and gospel choirs, which have very strong vocal traditions, but for folks who are part of those may or may not necessarily have degrees in music. And so that idea was something that I was quite troubled by. I appreciated that the organization had undertaken a racial equity audit from 2021 to 2022, and it included some changes around multiple audition times for new members being undertaken. So I think there is potentially some initiative moving this direction, but I really needed to see a lot more for it to move into the strong category for me.
I agree with a lot of that, and I had them in this category in the kind of mid-fair. I definitely believe that the project itself is timely. I agree with that, and certainly I think it is a public benefit. These are serious issues, and the only other thing that I thought is that for me, there didn't seem to be a correlating effort to actively invite a diverse audience. And so I think I would have liked to have seen more along that way.
I think as Melissa scored it, I did score it strong for similar reasons. You know, I appreciate the thought and intention that they demonstrated in their thematic programming, and that they're using their very specific art form to speak to larger social issues and common community experiences. I think what would have strengthened it for me here is I wanted to see more evidence of that as related to their definition of community in response to question 2A. But as I said, I do appreciate that you've used the audit that you performed, and it's great that you did that to inform your programming. And I think it's great that you're using that also to fund other nonprofit and service providers. I think I wanted to see a little more evidence that you have representatives from those institutions and the populations whom they serve on any advisory committee or in some sort of programmatic planning capacity, just to, again, working toward that goal of public benefit in terms of sharing power and really building collaborative programs, especially when you're working with different nonprofits and service providers. But I thought it was strong.
Great. Next, we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criteria.
I'll just say really briefly, my comments were brief on this. So I did indeed believe that the project itself does reflect a vibrant and fresh programming. And so I scored them in a strong area for that.
I did as well. I thought they had a very impressive, or they were able to explain a very impressive process of reflection. I really appreciated that. And just would love to see as they develop more opportunities for building capacity and professional development. But I thought it was nice that they were looking at modeling for other community choirs.
Great. If there's no new or differing thoughts, we can move on to the next category, which is organizational capacity, which again is an organization's ability to successfully plan and manage its projects.
For me, this was, relatively upper fare to lower strong, strong leadership, seemed like good financials, seemed like a reasonable budget. I did kind of make the note kind of in thinking about and looking at some of the supporting materials, who were the folks who we could kind of like tell from sort of like just a sort of like a visually diverse kind of perspective. I think that was something that could have been improved. But other than that, I thought organizational capacity was relatively good on this one. Don't really have any issues believing that they'll be able to execute this project.
I'm similar. I scored them on the upper end of this. Appears they have the staffing, the volunteers, the infrastructure in place to move forward successfully.
All right, this is where I may need some help from my fellow panelists. To me, the project narrative seemed to suggest that if CAC funding was not received, that the project may not go on. And so that was a bit concerning for me. And I thought perhaps, and perhaps I read this wrong, and if no one else picked up on it, it's probably just me. It looked as though the budget request was very close to 50% the total budget required for the program. And I thought that was a bit concerning that there was no other places where they might get funding for the program or search for it, or plan Bs, as it were. So did anyone else have that concern? Was it just me?
No, I had that same note about the funding, just that I would love to see how they might adjust their programming if things didn't come through. And yeah, so shared your concern in that respect.
Okay. For me, for that reason, that's why I put them in the fair category for this segment.
And I put them probably in the lower end of strong. For that reason, I still, I guess I have a faith in their ability to do this based on other aspects of their application. And I certainly appreciate the diversity of professional experience on their board. I thought that was good to see, particularly as they're trying to do more community-centered or thematic programming.
Great, we are at time. That concludes our time for Cleveland Chamber Choir. Panelists, please submit your scores and we'll turn to the next organization applicant, which is Cleveland Chamber Music Society, in just a moment.
If I don't, just to be clear, I don't need to change a score. I don't need to do anything. There's no other. Is that
Correct.
right?
Yes, if you don't have any changes to your score, you don't have to modify anything or change anything. It's already
Okay.
set.
Thanks.
No problem. Thank you. Our next application is from Cleveland Chamber Music Society for their project titled Anthony McGill, Susanna Phillips, Myra Hung Wong, Chavez Daughters Speaks, and more. New York Philharmonic principal clarinet and star soloist Anthony McGill met opera star Susanna Phillips and pianist Myra Wong perform and Midwest premiere and first reading before a live audience of James Lee's Third's new piece, Chavez Daughters Speak. Setting to music the poetry of Lou Ella Hickman, this piece is paired with Schubert's rarely performed Shepherd on the Rock. Would someone like to get us started on how the application relates to the public benefit criteria? Which is the organization's ability to meaningfully and authentically engage its community through its project.
I can get us going here. This to me was upper fair, though actually I'm now wondering if I'm wrong about that, but maybe I can hear more from panelists and might have a different perspective. I think that the organization had a strong understanding of the community being served in terms of a three-part community of subscribers, communities of color, and Black classical music students, which was a really nice kind of like intersection that I was really appreciative of. That is a highly underserved population within classical music community. So I really appreciate that. The connection between Cleveland Institute of Music Black Student Union and McGill was also there, and having him do a masterclass is great. For me, in terms of power sharing, that was not so evident. It was not quite clear to me that how understanding and respect/engagement of this idea came about. How was it decided to work with the CIM Black Student Union? What was the initiative there? And I think that's one of the reasons why for me there in the upper part of FAIR, I would have loved to have just a little bit of a sense of how those conversations happened, and to know, was this actually something student driven, or was this something that is just, part of kind of the polish and the sheen of a classical music, West sort of like high profile musician coming to a community to work. Accessibility seemed high for programming through Pay What You Can, and also a history of free programming online, which was great. There was a strong commitment, it seemed, to sharing classical music. I don't know where this fits in. For me, it was in public benefit, in terms of, it seemed that this presenting of a work was something that had already occurred, co-signing what seemed to be a May 2021 performance in New York City by the same trio. And rather than challenging kind of like internal structures that build meaningful relationships with community members, it wasn't clear to me, for example, would the Black Student Union members of the CIM, like, would those students get free tickets to the concert? Would there be other sorts of ways that they might be able to be supported aside from the masterclass with McGill? Appreciated the transportation support. And I think for me, where this kind of came to is I was wondering about the ways in which the model minority stereotypes kind of play out in this particular set of programming. With supporting materials, particularly the season brochure, seem to indicate that McGill is the only Black figure performing in any of the programming that they have going on this particular season. And I'd also love to see more than just a 15% communities of color sort of target percentage. And what do we mean by communities of color? Who is that, right? What is a sort of, I would love some disaggregated sort of like thoughts around that. So I guess now, as I understand now why, yes, upper FAIR is where I'm at for this category with this application.
Any new or differing perspectives or scores?
I'm gonna jump in because I think I had like almost not completely opposite, but I was kind of gushing over this, but it might be just me. We're doing Cleveland Chamber of Music Society, right? So I thought this project was very well conceived, and really demonstrated that they were demonstrating a knowledge of the expectations of their particular community, their CCMS community. I thought that it was sophisticated yet accessible, and I thought it was relevant to diverse audiences on theme. And I thought that there were opportunities for engagement and discussion, which lended itself to the building of relationships and connections with their publics. I thought the venue was also accessible, and the pricing was not a hindrance to participation. So for me, I really did give them a very strong on this public benefit piece.
Great, thank you both. Next, we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy criteria, which is the organization's ability to create a quality project that inspires and challenges its community. Lisa or Melissa?
See what I scored. Sorry. I scored a mid-strong on this artistic cultural vibrancy. I feel like music of this type can be intimidating to community members who aren't used to the sophistication of such music and the history of it. And I feel like they're really inviting the community to experience it and and be a part of such a rich cultural heritage of it. I like that it's accessible through ticketing, which $5 up to $40, free pay as you can. It goes back to public benefits. So I scored this one strong in terms of artistic and cultural vibrancy.
I scored it sort of on the lower end of strong as well in artistic and cultural vibrancy. I thought you had a nice staffing description section. I appreciate the promotion of new work and diverse composers. But the programming was compelling and speaks to a diverse audience, still questioning though how community contributes, especially in how sort of that reflective process works for you, and sort of where is that sort of feedback loop or mechanism. And my other note that I have here is just questioning what does embracing the opportunity mean and how do you measure that? So.
Yeah, if I can just piggyback on that last point, that for me, this was in the sort of like mid-fair, but I think hearing some of my colleagues sort of marks, I might be want to reconsider. One thing that was a struggle for me was the process of reflection around this seemed to be either missing or difficult for me to at least ascertain. I didn't understand what it meant to say that they were interested in having sort of like folks obtain interest and other partner groups, again, to this point that Lisa was talking about, embrace the opportunity to explore with us cultural, ethnic, and contemporary issues through a chamber music lens. That's a little bit vague. I don't know quite what that means. And the other thing that kind of moved this away from the strong category for me was that the language of the application overall seems to indicate that it was up to communities of color to indicate their interest to come to a primarily white organization to break into a primarily white field. Why would they do that? What makes it worth it? What's in it for them? What's the incentive? Of course, we have spoken about the kind of the relationship with the Cleveland Institute of Music and the Black Student Union there. And I also am wondering about how this relates to the audiences that they're thinking about.
Great. We'll move over to the organizational capacity, and which is an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
Sorry, my mouse is wiggly. So my notes on this go something like this. I felt like the project team, the board, and the staff seemed to be qualified, experienced, and capable of producing the project. The budget seemed realistic and appropriate. I did note that there didn't seem to be any expectation of corporate sponsorship, which I don't know if that's an opportunity, but that is something that I noted. And so for me, I had them in the mid-strong for that.
I had them as sort of strong as well. I think that they have a nice safety net and they seem well placed to weather any budget shortfalls. Would love to know if they plan though to adjust their programming in the event that they do have a shortfall. And then I just would love to see more additional formal measures of evaluation. Or I imagine they do that already, but just wanted more clear statement on that.
Great. If there is no additional thoughts or scores or feedback here, we can conclude our time for Cleveland Chamber Music Society. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Cleveland Rocks Past, Present, Future in just a moment. Great. Our next application is from Cleveland Rocks Past, Present, Future for their project titled Music Saves 23, Building a Diverse and Dynamic Community by Supporting and Presenting Local Musicians. Cleveland Rocks plans to do 1 or 2 free concerts a month throughout the year, with more outdoor shows in the summer months at various spaces in the Waterloo Arts and Entertainment District. They have added some free workshops to their yearly programming focused on the greater Cleveland original music community to help musicians grow their audience and develop business skills. Would someone like to get started on how this application relates to the public benefit criterion?
I scored them in terms of public benefit in the upper strong category. What I particularly liked about it was it's a year long. They're incrementally continuing to root themselves in the music scene. And I appreciated that, layering it with concerts and workshops. So it's it's well woven together throughout the year.
These folks were also strong for me. I really appreciated the launch of an artist relief fund during the pandemic that supported independent artists. Go team, keep that up. Like, we love that. Very clear for me demonstration of the needs of the local musician community in Northeast Ohio and creating further opportunities for performance beyond the original summer series. Great. It was not quite clear to me, and perhaps other panelists saw this and I didn't, how the claims to diversity would be achieved, even if the supporting materials did demonstrate that they were achieved. It just wasn't quite clear for me what that process was, and I would maybe love just another sentence or two perhaps to explain that further. Accessibility was also a little bit hard to determine in terms of the cost of performances. I at least don't recall seeing a note about whether they were ticketed or free. Perhaps somebody else has seen. Mark seems to have an idea, so if you do, please help me out. But live streaming seemed to increase access, so for me, I think that was that. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, I thought I read that there was, in fact, it's in my notes, so I'll just go ahead and give that. I thought that the event does indeed provide the project provides an opportunity to build and strengthen meaningful relationships with their defined community and audiences. And I thought that they were making a decent effort at doing that through increasing access through multiple venues and mixed pricing options, which I'm pretty sure I saw that. And I thought I saw from free to ticketed. So that's actually why I scored it in the, in the strong category. But those were my working notes.
I also scored it strong. I specifically, sorry, I had a cat jump off a box. I just wanted to add the note that I very much appreciated how you defined your community. I thought that was a very nicely specific section, and how you explained how you were supporting that community, I thought was very good. It was just very, very specific.
Great. If there's no additional comments, we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criterion, which is the organization's ability to create a quality project that inspires and challenges its community.
I scored this one mid-strong. I like the integration of the experience of arts and culture and learning within arts and culture, how it all is married together. Audience have the experience of experiencing the artists, the musicians have the opportunity to learn and grow in their craft. And that was well spelled out throughout the application.
For me, this was sort of mid to upper fair, again, because it was not clear to me how decisions are made about which artists are being invited and programmed. And I think that for me goes directly to the one of the funding criteria is around based on principles of mutuality, co-creation, authenticity, and collaboration with community. So it's difficult for me to determine the level to which that is happening without kind of knowing a bit more about the process. But nonetheless, it does seem like diverse arts professionals are hired, inclusive of recent grads from Tri-C who could develop their skills in a professional context. Really appreciated that. Thought that was really top notch. And I also had a bit more wonderings around the process of reflection and goals for the project, which to me did not appear most clearly defined. But at the same time, there were strong connections to national venues like House of Blues, et cetera. So that I think balanced out and brought it a bit to the sort of upper part of the fair category for me.
Okay, I actually don't have any working notes on this one, but nothing jumped out at me as particularly problematic. And so I have them scored in the, I would say lower strong for this category.
I had them scored as strong as well, with just demonstrating a good commitment to professional development of musicians and leveraging the expertise that resides in Cleveland. And I love that they use the Rock Solid Summit project to inform their programming. Certainly would love to see more reflected next time, right, in their narrative. And I would love to see a more formal integration of the diverse voices represented in their population that they explicitly highlighted in their narrative. Are there any formal mechanisms that enable them to sort of influence programmings and offerings? But I did think they were strong.
Great. Next, we'll move on to our final criteria, which is organizational capacity, which again is an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
Yeah, I can go first. I have them as strong in this, sort of on the lower end of strong. I would love a more formalized, structured plan of assessing programs as you make progress for that goal. And I think that was stated previously. I think it seems like they have a strong, diverse, competent team. And I would love more information or detail about sort of what these other grants, or kind of that note on contingency, again, if there's a funding shortfall, where might you find that additional funding?
Might be a little bit of a broken record here, but again, I'm not sure what principles were being used in terms of the integration of sort of DEI approaches into staff hiring. So would love a little bit more about that. I think that's a different way perhaps of saying something that Lisa just said. Really appreciated that in the event that they didn't get the full funding, the idea was to scale back the number of shows rather than paying artists less. We like putting people first, so that's great. And it seemed like the team was capable and ready to implement the project. For me, it was upper fair.
Okay, and for me, it seemed as though the team was definitely working collaboratively and evaluating the results of their efforts, and that they were indeed setting goals to improve and increase their mission impact. And so I scored them in the mid-strong for that.
I scored them in terms of organizational capacity in the fair. I was curious, it's a lot of programming, a lot of events throughout the year, and 40,000, will it go that far throughout the year? And I was just curious about that. They break it down and spell it out, but it's not a lot of money for a year-long programming.
Great. If there's no additional comments, we can conclude our time with Cleveland Rocks, past, present, and future. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Environmental Health Watch in just a moment. Our next application is from Environmental Health Watch for their project titled Fresh Fest Cleveland. Fresh Fest Cleveland is a free music, arts, and cultural festival nestled in the Urban Agriculture Innovation Zone located on Ridall Farm and Otter Park. This event features a series of workshops, educational demos, musical performances, art installations, kids zone, farmers market, and a food and arts vendor. They activate creative safe spaces and inspire leadership through holistic activities, focus on performing arts, visual and culinary arts, health and wellness, and urban agriculture. Would someone like us get started around how this application relates to the public benefit criteria?
I can go. This was solidly strong for me. I thought there was a strong process of servicing community needs from surveys and interviews. It seemed like an intentional placement of the festival in a community that has a quote negative reputation. Absolutely loved the long local engagement with Ward 5 over a 10-year period. That was really great. Happy to see that. That's really good stuff. Specific attention to placemaking based on community needs, and it's free with past and planned marketing, including radio ads and public postcards, which is mega awesome considering that there's also maybe questions of internet access in particular communities. And so going old school with radios and kind of, you know, the hard copy stuff is really the way to go. So for me, this was solidly strong.
I went with public benefit as on the upper end of strong as well. I was very drawn into that they are focusing on a community that needs and deserves even more activation in terms of arts and culture and placemaking and embeddedness in community richness. And I think they've put forth a great project proposal to do so.
Similarly strong. I just wanted to give another shout out to the long-standing relationship that they've developed. That is, you don't really see that enough, I think, when we're doing this sort of programming. And I very much appreciated their use of direct input from residents and commitment to community ownership. I think that's huge, and would just look forward to hearing more about sort of power sharing as they develop, because I think that they're very well placed for that. So very strong public benefit.
I thought that the length of time that the project is proposed for lends itself to its ability to provide public benefit to its community. And I also agree that I like the fact that they use this kind of a holistic and data-centric concept in engaging their residents, just to make sure that they are relevant to the folks that they serve. So I thought that was excellent, and they are in a strong category for that for me.
Great, thank you, everyone. Next, we'll move on to the artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criterion. Mark?
Sure. Oh, I thought I put it last. I thought that their effort in this regard seemed strong as well, and that they were very aware of the cultural and community needs with a focus on equitable outcomes. Also, that they are being collaborative with other organizations and co-creators. So I gave them a strong for that category as well.
Also strong for me, just co-signing everything that Mark said. The only thing that I would add is I have a question. Their process of reflection seems to include a survey and online registration. I just wanted a little bit more detail about what that process would look like, but otherwise strong for me.
Great. If there's no additional comments or scores for that criteria, we can move on to the final criteria, which is organizational capacity, which again is an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
I scored this one in the strong category. Mainly, I was appreciative of all the players who are at the table for planning, overseeing, executing this event, from residents to artists to business owners to mentors, for the full gamut of folks at the table.
I'm sorry, I'll just say real quick, because I actually don't have any working notes on this other than the fact that nothing jumped out at me as being particularly problematic. And I did score them in the mid-strong for their organizational capacity.
Great. If there's no new or differing perspectives or scores, we can conclude our time for Environmental Health Watch. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Literary Cleveland in just a moment. And for the audience, as well as the panelists, we will be taking a break after Little Lumpy's Center for Educational Initiatives, which is after Literary Cleveland. So our next application is from Literary Cleveland for their project titled Incubator Conference. The Literary Cleveland Incubator Writing Conference is a free writing and literary arts festival that combines workshops, panel discussions, craft talks, readings, open mics, and more to empower writers, advance artistic dialogue, celebrate literary excellence, and amplify local voices. Would someone like to get us started on how this application relates to the public benefit criteria?
This one was low strong for me. It seemed that they had a clear understanding of the community that was being served through offering specific types of sessions and panels geared towards emerging writers, seeking agents, looking to break into the publishing industry, et cetera. So I think the definition of community was quite clear. Past panels and sessions demonstrated a range of community members who are participating and inclusive of diverse audience members, accessibility to the community through recognition of the role that literacy plays and can play in Cleveland, and the programming was free. So for me, it was in the strong category.
I agree. It was in strong for me as well. I said they have a nice use of advisory group and a great composition, nice partnerships while focusing within your chosen form of expression, and just good thought to diversifying presenters and nurturing new writers.
For public benefit, I went with strong. I don't often see literary arts come across my desk. It's one of those artistic avenues that aren't always given center stage, and they're really highlighting it and going all in. And so I appreciated seeing one that's focused on literature.
I agree with everybody. I have this in the strong category. And for me, I felt the project was mindful of the power dynamics in the literary space, and that they were indeed addressing it by incorporating and serving the needs of underrepresented groups. And I won't say everything that everybody's already said, but I like that advisory group. And I really liked the free and citywide, making it accessible in the diverse collaborations. Again, I thought this really led them to strong in the public benefit.
Great, thank you all. Next, we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criterion, which is an organization's ability to create a quality project that inspires and challenges its community.
Please.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, no, please, after you.
I said the first one. Go ahead.
I don't have much to say, actually, so I'll be fast. So I have this as strong as well. Again, I'll go back and reiterate that I thought they were good partnerships, nice focus on professional development for writers from diverse backgrounds and forms within the literary art realm, nice focus on topics that are relevant to their immediate community. And my last note is just I'm glad that they're using evaluations. Would love to see a sample, but yeah.
I probably don't need to say anything because Lisa said mostly everything I was going to say. The only thing I would add is I appreciated the intergenerational engagement with community members. I thought that was great. For me, this is, to be clear, in the strong category on this scoring criteria. And also on the process of reflection, I just wanted a little more clarity on what these goal phrases like empower them and connected them to their community mean. But otherwise, that process particularly was apparent and the goals were defined. So I thought that was good.
I agree. Echo everything. I had them in the strong category for this as well, and so I'll skip the first part since everybody said that, and I'll just say the one thing that stood out for me was in this area was this effort to include addressing the issues of diversity and inclusion through this lens of social justice. Was I thought that was terrific. So they're in the strong category for me.
Great. We can then move on to the final criteria, which is organizational capacity.
Again, go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Jumping the gun way too quickly. Please go ahead.
Oh, Melissa, you're muted.
I'm not any good at this. Low strong on organizational capacity for staff, though they have 70 presenters projected with 4 staff and 30 volunteers. That seems like a strong team to manage all of that. Their budget seems very straightforward, that they have the capacity to move forward economically. So strong book.
Agreed with it being strong. The other thing that I would add, I mentioned this in a previous review, is that I appreciated the equitable compensation and the fact that they were only, in the event that they didn't get the full funding, only cutting money to arts and cultural professionals and fellows as a last resort. That should, I think, be de rigueur and standard for all of us. And I really appreciate that this organization is prioritizing that. Strong for me.
I agree with everything that's been said. I just want to say they did a nice job explaining how they would weather a budget shortfall. So I appreciated that.
And my notes say nothing jumps out as problematic with the budget. It appears to be really realistic and appropriate. And then everybody else said everything. I thought that the team seemed qualified in working together to plan and implement and measure their efforts. So they're in the lower strong for me.
Great. And that concludes our time for Literary Cleveland. Panelists, please submit your scores and we'll turn next to Little Lumpy Center for Educational Initiatives in just a moment. And as I previously stated, we will be taking a break after this upcoming application for about 5 minutes. So jumping in here for our next application is Little Lumpy Center for Educational Initiatives for their project titled the 6th Annual Great Lakes African American Conference. The Great Lakes African American Writers Conference, Glossy, celebrates the impact African American literature has on the world. They create a communal and inclusive space for lovers of literature and of all ethnicities for mutual learning and sharing. Would someone like to get started around how this application relates to the public benefit criteria, which is an organization's ability to meaningfully and authentically engage its community through its project?
I can start. To me, there was, this was in the strong category, lower part of strong for me. I thought there was a clear connection to community and demonstrated understanding of the need for more programming emphasizing the intersection of Blackness and literacy in Cleveland. I thought that was well articulated. The connection to the literary community through Cleveland Book Week and connection to Black communities through a range of speakers and sessions was also very evident. And I thought that was very demonstrative of their public benefit. Accessibility seemed high, maintained through free programming and a hybrid format. I was wondering, and I would have loved to hear if they were going to offer ASL interpretation, given the emphasis that they were placing on the hybrid format and that to increase accessibility even more. And that's the only thing I think that left it in the lower strong rather than moving it any higher for me.
Any new or differing comments around public benefit?
I'll go. For my notes, I have that the stated target audience was very broad. Remember, I'm the marketing guy. And I thought perhaps it was so broad that it might not be effectively marketed to. So that was a red flag for me. And it did seem that efforts are being made to be effective at delivering on their mission. And I felt like there needed to be more clarity towards the funding criteria needed. So that's what I had in my notes.
And can you pull that back to us, the scoring framework for me?
Yeah, I had it as fair, mid-fair.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add that I had it as sort of on that border between fair and strong. And it might be nice to see them enumerate some of their institutional partners and how that might have helped them connect deeply within the community.
Great. Next, we'll move on to the Artistic and Cultural Vibrancy Funding Criterion, which is an organization's ability to create a quality project that inspires and challenges its community.
A bit more mid-fair for me for a couple of reasons. One, I did not find much evidence around the idea of co-creation in terms of that principle. So would have loved some more details that would have helped me understand that. It did seem that there was strong authenticity that forwards and improves the mission of the organization. particularly through development of arts and culture professionals, including exposing young, inspiring Black writers to role models. The exact model, though, for how this was to be achieved was not particularly clear to me. It seemed like that was kind of the goal, but I didn't quite know how that was going to happen. And the process of reflection was evident through surveys, but again, it seemed like the goal was not quite well defined in that particular instance. And so that for those reasons, it was in the fair category for me.
I scored them in a mid-strong in terms of artistic and cultural vibrancy. They're putting center stage diverse voices that historically have not been center stage, and they're really doing that in a all-in manner. And they have historical prowess of doing this in the past and bring it into the future. So that was a strong for me.
Actually, for me, this was a fair. I scored this fair, and I really felt as though that there could have been a more direct and clearer answer to this part of the application, and I really was looking for a bit more evidence. So it's a fair for me.
There is no additional comments or comments around this area. We can move on to the next criteria, which is around organizational capacity.
I'll go. On this one, I'm real brief. It does indeed seem that the team is committed and qualified, definitely qualified for this work in the project, and so I have them at a strong.
In addition to that, they're also in the strong section for me. I'll also appreciate noting the kind of diverse internal culture with a range of identities that are represented, and bringing that out in the application was something I appreciated that mention of.
I echo what they're saying. It's strong. They have a team in place, a team with history of doing this in the past. So they have the professional prowess to make this successful.
It was strong for me as well. I thought they had a reasonable and realistic budget. I think probably the one question apparently that I have in my notes is just I wanted a little more detailed explanation again of how you plan to handle a shortfall in fundraising and how it might impact programming versus relying upon your major donors.
Great, thank you all. And that concludes our time for Little Lumpy Center for Educational Initiatives. Panelists, please submit your scores. And we'll take a now 5-minute break here and return back with Northwest Neighborhoods CDC in about 5 minutes. So everyone feel free to take a break and go off video if you would like. Great. Welcome back, everyone. We will be getting started shortly here with our next application, which will be Northwest Neighborhoods CDC. For their project titled Edgewater Neighbor Fest. Edgewater Neighbor Fest is a day of outdoor arts, games, entertainment, shopping, and dining in Cleveland's Edgewater neighborhood. They will fill their streets with free all-age activities to build meaningful connections between residents, visitors, and local businesses. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion?
I scored them in the low strong. What I appreciated, one aspect I appreciated about their application is how they invite community members, residents, using postcards and not totally relying on the digital model of inviting their community in Spanish and English. So language barriers are decreased. So that's one thing I noted.
I also had this in the strong category. I said there was strong engagement and leadership opportunities for residents and partnering businesses and institutions within the neighborhood, and good that they engaged the council. It's nice to see that sort of level and type of engagement, and good demonstration of consistent engagement within the neighborhood.
These folks also came in at strong for me. I thought there was a strong understanding of the local neighborhood being served and a very clear definition and inclusive of the LGBTQ+ history of the neighborhood, which was great. There's already been mention of the local rootedness. I really appreciated the idea of intentionally redistributing resources from a richer part of the neighborhood to a poorer part of the neighborhood. Robin Hood all day, every day. And the evaluation metric emphasizing a connection between residents, artists, and businesses, and baking that into a process of reflection. I think this application did a particularly good job of asking a very specific question and making it clear. The question here was, did you make a new meaningful connection with a neighbor, business, artist, or organization at this event? And I think that was just, quite well defined. So appreciated that. Strong for me.
I'm in agreement with everyone on this one. It's strong for me as well. For all of those reasons, I won't go through. There's nothing really that I said that's any different from what everybody else has already shared.
Great. Let's move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criteria.
I can start here. Again, strong for me in this category. A community advisory committee was a good thing to see that consisted of local business owners and residents. And that to me was very demonstrative of a co-creation of NeighborFest, which was exactly one of the principles that we're looking for. Appreciated that all performers were BIPOC and that also queer performers were centered. And opportunities to perform, they intentionally made that as a way to provide exposure for performers, multiple vendors, a strong reflective function, right? And I appreciated the mention of noticing physically disabled folks at the last NeighborFest and wanting to work better to welcome those folks at this one. Also would have appreciated just a little bit more detail on how they would do that, but I appreciated that noticing was happening. So strong for me on this category.
Any new or differing perspectives? I'm not seeing it. Oh, Mark.
Oh, I'll be brief, but I really did enjoy and like this commitment to the principle of collaboration with their, these diverse voices at the table for their planning efforts. So I thought that they are also in the strong category for me in this area.
Great. Then we can move on to our final criteria, which is discussing organizational capacity, which again is an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its projects.
Although I put this one in strong, my one comment or reflection is if they weren't able to get the funding, what would they do? And they said they'll scale back, but then they also talked about how scaling back in 2021 was not successful because it grew so much and beyond their control. And so that was a curious juxtaposition that I noticed.
Any new or differing perspectives or comments that we would like to add on the record? Great. And that will conclude our time for the Northwest Neighborhoods CDC. Panelists, please submit your scores and we'll turn next to Pals for Healing in just a moment. As stated, our next application is Pals for Healing for their project Art Therapy Heals and Empowers. They will use the healing power of the arts to help empower people at risk and bring healing to those who have suffered trauma and or loss. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criteria, which once again is an organization's ability to meaningfully and authentically engage its community through its project?
I shall start. For me, these folks were fair, solidly in the middle of fair. On the one hand, I think they had a strong understanding of the community that they were trying to serve and its needs. And I thought they effectively integrated arts practices. But on the other hand, and of course, it was accessible with a variety of payment options for programming. But on the other hand, I felt a slightly thinner definition on how they were going to gather folks and actually what constitutes that community. It seemed like they had a very broad kind of conceptualization of it, but I didn't quite get the sort of, more nuts and bolts. How we bring people into this space and invite them in was, I think, something that was, I struggled to find evidence for. So if other panelists have read something else, please help me out. And I was also not quite clear on what the funding itself is exactly supporting in terms of how many classes, what locations, these sorts of things. Again, that was my reading. Other folks might have had a different way of seeing it. But for me, this was in the middle of the fair category.
I agree. In terms of public, I did do high on public benefit. It's obvious that it's needed within the community, but there was like broad strokes on specifically how the funding would be used and who would be recruited in to optimize the services and things of that nature. Not that I think they don't understand or know all of that. It just wasn't as concisely detailed in the application.
I had them as sort of low on the lower end of strong. I just have a couple of notes because I certainly would echo some of the comments. I think what pushed them over a little bit out of fair for me was just that they had some strong, long-standing community partnerships with institutions, which I thought was promising. And they had demonstrated a responsiveness to some community needs and attempts to engage a diverse population. But the two specific comments that I have are in their organizational history explanation. I think the sentence was written, I built a diverse therapy staff that mimics the populations we serve. And I think mimics for some reason just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And then there was another part in the narrative where there's a reference to an at-risk population. And I think that in a lot of narrative, particularly looking at art therapists and social work, we're kind of moving away from that term at risk. And so looking for more specific descriptions of a population rather than that particular term. But that's, again, I didn't necessarily score down on that. That was just a note that I wanted to give back to the grant writer.
I think that's an excellent comment. I wanted to say that this project for me in this area, I scored it high fair. Yeah. And part of the reason was I was really pleased to see that there was that the project itself is based on responses from the community, and that there is this commitment to artistic archival quality. And so I found that intriguing. Maybe would have liked to maybe heard more about that. But I really find your last comment very, very, very good about that, the word choices.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criteria. Does any panelists have any comments around this area?
I'll go, I guess. I had them as strong in this category. I thought they had a strong description of their team and why they're qualified to complete the project. I thought they had a good use of a reflective process and are striving to build an authentic program that sort of relies upon these strong partnerships. So I put them as strong.
I agree with that. Only one or two things to add, which is that I appreciated that they were also working to train future art therapists, which I think is also something that happens in this category around having arts and cultural professionals have sort of, careers and future orientation. And I also appreciated the integration with other therapeutic modalities like EMDR that provided a more holistic approach to healing as opposed to just, only focusing on the one that they were offering.
I also, in this realm, scored them low, hot, low, strong. They conveyed well the history of their success. They're not new to this, so their continuation is apt to be successful. The integration of different modalities and thought processes and levels of staff skills, high-level staff supporting emerging staff in this field creates a rich diversity of voice and background.
Great. If there's no new or differing perspectives or any additional comments, we can move on to the final criteria, which is discussing organizational capacity.
I scored this on low, strong. I had a note, and maybe they've changed it. The project dates do not fall within the grant period. Maybe did I look at that correctly?
It's possible that that's a typo, but that it does, the application, yeah, you're right, Melissa, does say start date of January 1st, 2022 and an end date of December 1st, 2022.
Any other additional comments around organizational capacity for the organization?
I also did score them sort of on the low end of strong, and I just have a note that says I would love to see more about their surveys. Clearly they've administered those in the past. It would just be nice, I think, to include some samples and more explanation, but I did feel like they were strong.
Same for me, and the only other thing that I'd add is I appreciated the high percentage of the overall project that was being paid out to arts and cultural professionals. So again, putting people first is always a good thing.
Great. If there's no additional comments, we can conclude our time with Pals for Healing. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Refresh Collective in just a moment. Great. Our next application is from Refresh Collective for their project titled Fresh Force, Digital Arts Workforce Development. The Fresh Force is a digital arts mastery program for teenagers from inner city Cleveland. This intensive summer employment experience includes digital media education, public performance, and unique career exposure opportunities. Students will be trained in digital music composition, vocal recording, mixing and mastering, digital photography and videography, and graphic design.
I am so excited about this work. Oh my God, you all are amazing. So the first thing that I have in my working notes for this is the word brilliant, because I think it's brilliant. For me, this was like upper strong in this category. I thought engagement with youth and in particular skills specifically around music production, photo, video, graphic design, career exposure, and interpersonal communication skills. Y'all have the prospective students go to an interview workshop before attending the workshop, the interview itself. Like, please, yes, all the things. You're also paying the students, also amazing, right? Supporting them and their families to negotiate HR processes, which are historically white supremacy, cultural kind of like construct bastions, amazing. Clear understanding and prioritization of Black and brown youth. New print shop, helping folks attempt to move out of sex work with workforce readiness. accessible to the community through low-cost pricing, and also certain events that are clearly marketed as fundraisers. So there's a clear distinction between, making sure that things are accessible and also being able to sustain the organization and ongoing relationships with out-of-school time programming. Like, amazing, amazing, amazing.
I agree. It's a very strong benefit to the students, very engaged and dynamic. I feel like it will reach those groups of students really well. My comment where it would lower their application score is, so based on the application write-up, youth are provided a stipend for participating, which I agree with $6,500 going towards stipends, with 15 plus youth working for 6 weeks. It breaks down to about $75 a week per student. So is that what they're being paid per week? And so my comment is, does that teach them about equitable and equitable wages? So I have a concern in that area.
Okay, for me, I felt like this project, by its very nature, is authentically tied to its community. It's the fact that it's designed to educate and empower often marginalized inner city teens via workforce development. I can't imagine a better public benefit. And so there's my gushing point. So I scored them in the high strong for public benefit.
I also have them scored as strong in public benefit. I think great longstanding partnerships, again, with schools and community centers, and that certainly everything that's already been said. I do have one note that probably is just more out of curiosity than anything else. I just wanted to hear more about how the youth input specifically helps shape the programming, just because I just want to know more about how you specifically operate.
Great. We can move on to the next funding criteria, which is artistic and cultural vibrancy.
I'm again so excited for a couple of reasons. One, this is obviously in the upper strong for me. There was a clear calendar of events. There was intensive work for students that was very kind of clearly demarcated. There are very clear goals and outcomes regarding the particular skills that students will learn and documented effectively, but simply with pre and post surveys. And that yield fresh programming. And so it's in the name and they're living up to it. And that's literally one of the scoring criteria, which is amazing. So it's all there. I absolutely love that students leave the program with artistic credits to their name, right? Specifically original tracks, music videos, album art, custom apparel, live performances, right? They have a portfolio of work that they can then use to kind of move forward, as opposed to just being somebody that's helping on somebody else's project. And so the last piece for me then is that this seems to me to be directly preparing students for rewarding careers and giving them the skills to succeed in doing so. I mean, kind of Mark put it best, I think, when saying it's really hard to imagine a better public benefit.
So just to tag on, so we could high five over this one, I think. So yeah, 100%. In this category, I have them scored high strong, again, mainly because the youth participants are indeed the main creators of the products and the things that they're coming up with. And I just and I was able to, so because I was so enamored by this particular project, I was definitely able to see evidence and proof of the work being done. So just kudos, and I gave them a high strong for this.
I gave them strong as well. I like the tangible link between art and economic value, and teaching the youth how to, to really value themselves economically and do that in a very professional way that honors their art, but values the realities of needing to sustain yourself economically in the world.
Great. If there's no additional comments, we can move over to organizational capacity.
Okay, so just real quick, this is the only area that I scored them. They're still strong, but then lower strong for me in this area. The concern I had was while the leadership and staff seem qualified, eminently so, there seems to have been, from what I could glean, an additional FTE. To me, the board actually seems small for the size of the organization. And so I think there may be some opportunity with board development there. And I think that would help their organizational capacity.
They were also strong for me. Sorry, Lisa. They were also strong for me. The only thing, the one thing that I would just add as a comment here that I really appreciated, it's not that I'm less jazzed about the organization or the entity. It's just that organizational capacity to me as a category is harder to get as excited about as artistic and cultural vibrancy and some of these others. Not in a good way or bad way. Lisa and I apparently will have a conversation about this later. But what I will say is that I really appreciated that bringing youth back as instructors was a really sort of generational kind of way to be thinking about how to build out organizational capacity, where it's not just who are the folks who are leading now, it's not just who are they teaching, it's also who's who's in between, right, to be able to kind of carry the work of the organization forward. So that was something I appreciated in the strong category for me on this one too.
Right. So I think as a nonprofit consultant, I am supposed to gush and get excited about organizational capacity. So I actually, and I will on this project, I gave them a very high strong on this. I thought they had a great explanation of internal processes, engaged a diverse and qualified team. They had great use of surveys and reporting of metrics. I think out of any of the grants that we've read, they're responsive and reflective. And I thought they had a great description of contingency plans and a realistic budget. So I do, though, hear your note, Mark, about the board, and I can, certainly see that. It's great that they have opportunities to get even stronger through that, but I'm a fan of the organization.
I did lower strong. They appear to have a pretty diverse income stream, which creates strength of an organization. I'll just reemphasize the stipends paid to the youth, if they're equitable and fair for the time and the value of their weeks with them. That's my only, I'd say, negative or challenging feedback.
Great. Thank you all. That concludes our time for Refresh Collective. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Cleveland School of Dance in just a moment. Or title School of Cleveland Ballet. It might be School of Cleveland Ballet in the online system. Differing names. Great. So our next application is from Cleveland School of Dance, or known as School of Cleveland Ballet, for their project titled Dance Connect. School of Cleveland Ballet is seeking funding assistance to support in-school residencies throughout the Cleveland metropolitan area for area youth ages 7 through 12. The 16-week residency program consists of 8 classes each fall and spring. The youth have the opportunity to dance alongside professional ballet dancers from Cleveland Ballet. Would someone like to get started around how this application reflects and relates to the public benefit criteria, which is an organization's ability to meaningfully and authentically engage its community through its project?
I can begin on this one. This project to me was in the middle of the fair category, and the reason for which is, to me, I was not able to find a power sharing approach to the organization's work, nor was I able to find one that understood how the white form of classical ballet has problematically disciplined the very bodies of the community that the organization seeks to work with, Black youth often, for centuries. And that was not, I could not find evidence of understanding and reckoning and wrestling with that anywhere in the application. In addition, the school had assurances from CMSD of the value of this work, but does not appear from what they were describing to employ art forms, musical selections, or aesthetics that are aligned with the population that it was primarily seeking to serve. The tickets to the events are free and to classes, which makes them more accessible, which I appreciated. And I had two questions, which is that what knowledge has the organization gained in working with this community in the past? It was not clear to me how they were integrating such knowledge and what the implications of having done this work in the past would mean going forward. And also and how does that affect how they would develop current and future programming? So for me, in this category of public benefit, it was in the middle of the fair category.
Great.
Yeah, I'll go. I had it scored in the mid-fair range for me. And it may be just because the project itself, its focus on the experience for the youth participants, it seemed really to have less of a public benefit. And so maybe I'm not reading that right, but that's one of the reasons why I put it in the mid-fair for me.
I put them in a low strong public benefit. I've seen programs of this nature through different communities, and they are very impactful. And so I have hope for this one. I do agree that they didn't talk a lot about how they were going to in a culturally sensitive manner, invite in the students to explore this modality of dance and the connections to past, present, and future in their own lives. That would be my only awareness in that respect.
And I echo all the previous comments. I have throughout my notes on this application. I just want more evidence. I want more explicitly stated information and explanation of your approach. And so I think we're left with a lot of assumptions or question marks. Whereas, I think it may be that you're doing it, and we just need to hear that more explicitly stated.
And Lisa, could you connect that back to the how that fell in your scoring?
Sure, sorry about that. Yeah, so I, like my fellow panelists, I'm in the fair category, on the upper end of fair, but fair.
Great, thank you. We can now move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy, which is an organization's ability to create a quality project that inspires and challenges its community.
I think for me, things began to go, well, for me, up in this category, because I did believe that I did feel like this project lended itself to building the arts and culture careers of the youth and the instructors. So I thought I saw pretty good evidence that that is an outcome that could be expected, and I did believe that I saw evidence that the team of professional instructors were diverse and were engaged with the project. So they are strong for me.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Nope, I was unmuting to go after you. So
Okay. Okay. And Mark, you're right. I mean, whereas in the previous section, my notes were all about more information, I do have them as in strong or low strong in this capacity. I felt like I appreciated the thought and intention that were given to diversifying staff. I do have a question of what does engagement for different abilities look like, good use of surveys. And I do want a little more discussion, but again, this might be more interests rather than that I felt like it was missing, just about how their art form and their programming within that specifically impacts outcomes for their participants and community at large. I just think that we can get more information and that would strengthen their story, but I did think they were strong in this respect.
I had them in fair actually for this one. I thought that again, I did not see too much evidence of the mutuality and co-creative approach to the project. And I think that was something that I struggled to reconcile. And perhaps my fellow panelists are reading things or seeing things that I did not see, but I actually struggled to find how the diverse perspectives and viewpoints of the staff that were being hired was being considered in part of the hiring process. for them. So if you do have if there's anything that I'm missing, I would love to be corrected on that. The process of reflection for me on this was a bit unclear. I wasn't quite sure how that was going to unfold. It does say things around kind of, post and pre and post assessment surveys to assess engagement, learning outcomes, and program effectiveness. I would love to, I guess, just know a little more about what that means. And I had a question, I don't know the answer to this, if arts and culture professionals are being prepared for careers in the arts through this work, and how does a DEI emphasis / focus show up? It was unclear to me, at least. I'm not saying it's not happening, but it was just unclear how it was happening. So for me, for those reasons, it's in the fair category.
Great. We can now move on to the next and final criteria, which is organizational capacity, which is an organization's ability to successfully plan and manage its projects. Would any panelists like to jump in here?
I scored them on high fair. And I think this is just an error in writing their proposal. The top, it says their project is 15,000. They're requesting 15,000. And then on the bottom, they're talking about 30,000. I think they just put an error of numbers at the top. The other thing I noticed, if they don't get funding, they're going to increase tuition costs. And immediately my brain goes to, well, if you increase tuition costs for some students, will that knock some students out? So I didn't feel like they had a very succinct plan of moving forward if they didn't get this the funding in a way that doesn't impact their current students who are enrolled and things of that nature.
I wanted to add to that, just to really underscore that second point that Melissa made, which is actually the reason why this was an organizational capacity week for me, because it seemed to me to be that was fundamentally undermining the point of the project, which was to serve low-income students, right? So if you are saying that you're not going to get the budget, and then as a consequence, you're going to increase tuition costs, what that's going to do is make it such that you are actually not able to do what you say you're going to do, which is to serve low-income students. So for me, as a consequence, that was something that was irreconcilable, and I had to put them in the weak category for that reason.
Okay, for me, I had this one in the fair category. And while I thought the budget seemed realistic and appropriate, I would have liked to see a more specific use of funds for CAC's portion. And that happened on some other readings, but this is the only one. I don't know how many I actually noted it on so there was some ambiguity with regards to usage. So that was why they weren't in the strong category for me.
Great. If there's no additional comments, panelists, that will conclude our time for Cleveland School of Dance. Panelists, please submit or School of Cleveland Ballet. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Talespinner Children's Theater in just a moment. Great. Our next application is from Talespinner Children's Theater for their project titled Redevelopment of Educational Programming Post-Pandemic. Talespinner Children's Theater is preparing to offer in-school residencies and gearing up to run a camp season in 2023 for the first time post-pandemic under their new leadership. Would someone like to get started on how this application relates to the public benefit criteria, which is an organization's ability to meaningfully and authentically engage its community through its projects? Who would like to get us started?
Okay, I'll go. And I would have went faster if my cursor was staying in one place. For me, I scored them in for public benefit in a strong, lower strong, but strong. And I guess the thing that jumped out at me was the conducting of community roundtables, that it did indeed demonstrate that the organization is committed to inclusivity, and is actively seeking to share power and engage with its community stakeholders. So that was at least one of the notes that I pulled out for that.
Mark, do you recall where exactly in the application the reference of community roundtables? You're already shaking your head, so maybe not. I would love if anyone has. I would love to just like.
It's in 2A
Thank
because
you.
that's a similar awareness that I had. Yeah, strong. I public benefit strong, but I like the integration of many voices in many ways of bringing those voices to the table to get a response of what's helpful and applicable to the community they're serving.
Yeah, I had them sort of high fare, low strong, kind of straddling that. So I think you're pushing me over a little bit. I do have in my notes, I appreciated the formal structures like roundtables and surveys that help identify community needs. I think I wanted more specific details about the community, how they're defining their community and about their specific students. And but I do appreciate their partnerships with organizations within the community. And then just wanted to see a clear statement about how they're defining the community and more demonstration of their knowledge of that community. Love that they're doing sensory friendly productions. I think that's great. And they've incorporated these as sign language interpreters. And it would be helpful to know if their selection of global tales was informed by the audience or participants or the community. And if I missed that, I apologize. So yeah, and just would love to hear more about that inclusion program, working with families living with disabilities. But I thought that was, yeah.
They were initially mid-fare for me, and then hearing some of the comments, they're a bit higher up now than where they were. I on this section appreciated the accessibility of low ticket costs, and percentage of students being on scholarship at camp at 25%. Would love to see that actually be higher and going forward if possible. I appreciated that there was a clear capacity to share power. They had a story in the application of a student with speech difficulties asking for a speaking part and one being written for them. I thought that was go team. It wasn't clear to me, perhaps on the detailed level, how outreach would be conducted, and perhaps I missed it, to ensure inclusivity in audiences and student populations, and perhaps that's based on pre-existing partnerships or past work. But it wasn't clear, at least I did not find, and if someone else has read something else, please feel free to correct me. But yeah, those are my thoughts on this section.
Great. Next, we'll move on to the Artistic and Cultural Vibrancy Funding Criteria, which is an organization's ability to create a quality project that inspires and challenges its community.
I'll go. I felt like the TCT, I'm calling them that, engages with a diverse and inclusive team of professionals that mirror the communities that they serve, and that this was a part of their stated and apparent value for equity and inclusion. That being able to connect with teachers, students, and TCT cultural professionals shows an appreciation for the principles of mutuality and co-creation. And so that for me, they got a mid-strong for that.
I had them as sort of mid to low strong as well. And I'd just like to add a comment that I think I wanted to see more explanation of formal methods of evaluation that kind of lead to their tailoring program, tailoring their programming and demonstrating a more formal process of reflection, contributing to more effective programming, just simply because I think their structure lends itself to some very easily implementable ways of surveying and getting information back and sort of building that loop in.
For me, this category was in the upper fair category. Co-creation was clear with the co-creation of puppets and masks. I thought that was very, very evident. And the process of reflection was clear. And there, it does also demonstrate, and it says that a diverse team of arts and cultural professionals is engaged, and that was demonstrated in the support materials. But again, the process of how that comes to pass was not quite clear for me. How are you making sure that that is happening? Is that only in particular types of tales in which, let's say, for example, like you're doing a tale from like the African continent, that therefore that would be the only time in which you would hire Black performers, right? I'm not suggesting that's what's happening, but I would love just more specifics. And also would love to know more about how the organization is coming to decide on particular works that are being created in a given summer camp, or who the artists are that are presenting those residencies, right? These are further questions around that. And also I would appreciate a move beyond what seemed to me to be a bit of a reliance on Shakespeare and Western stories like the Magic Flute. There were some other things as well that seem to happen historically, but I would love kind of, if they're talking about globality, then we really need to talk about, I think, globality perhaps in a more far-reaching kind of way. So as a result, in the upper part of the fair category for me on this.
Great. If there's no additional comments, we can move on to the final criteria, which is organizational capacity.
I scored them on low strong. Couple notes that I have is they have a history of relationships within the schools. They're not creating new relationships. They have a solid structure of like moving into the schools with a great history. I did notice, and this is similar to many organizations after or as we flow through the pandemic, seems like they're rebuilding their staff structure and their programming and all the things. And the only note that I make on that is that creates a pressure on an organization while trying to create their programming moving forward. So that's just a comment, nothing negative. I mean, many organizations are dealing with that right now. And they also, lastly, seem to have a good plan for, let's say they don't receive funding or all the funding, where would they go for funding? And they've clearly delineated where they will go.
This category was also low strong for me for all the reasons that were mentioned. I did have two things that I would love to get some more detail on. I love the fact that an applied theater organization is being run by people who have applied theater expertise and training and experience. I would really encourage, as a consequence of that, reflection on the integration of their own racial positioning as it relates to this particular type of work that we're doing. We know that applied theater started and has historically been a field that is historically white and has a pretty strong adjacence to whiteness, at least in the way that it's been practiced in the United States and in the UK and other places. So I would love a bit more reflection on that. And then related to that, I'm curious how sort of racial and also kind of like global diversity plays a role in the hiring for a world-oriented children's theater company. The current staff who are listed are both white passing women. And I would love to kind of understand a bit more of how they're thinking around some of these questions, because that seems to be the core ethos of how what this organization is trying to do. And so we just love a bit more details around that.
I think for me, I actually scored them in a high fair for organizational capacity. And I think it was maybe because someone was mentioning just this, there's something you can kind of see in the structuring of things that, and I think there's an effort underway currently to fill the educational director position, and maybe it's in my other notes, but I thought this position was maybe like really important to this particular project. And I do note that there are volunteers and they seem to have part-time staff available as well, but for me, maybe some capacity issues are happening.
Okay, thank you all for your comments. We are at time and conclude our time for Talespinner Children's Theater. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to the Brecksville Theater in just a moment. And we're coming here up on our final two applications. So great work, panelists and audience members. Thank you for being here with us as we get into our last two here, starting off with the Brecksville Theater for their project titled the Brecksville Theater Youth Summer Theater Camp. School-aged children from all communities, grades K through 12, are invited to join the Brecksville Theater for their Youth Summer Theater Camp. where they will be introduced to and refine their singing, acting, and dancing skills as they rehearse for this fully staged musical. They strive to inspire a lifelong appreciation of theater by providing educational experiences and entertainment opportunities. And so we'll get started first with public benefit, which again is an organization's ability to meaningfully and authentically engage its community through its projects. Who would like to get us started?
I'll get us started. For public benefit, did a strong high. One of the things I noted is they are attempting and are reaching a diverse population, sometimes outside of the traditional thought of diversity. What I mean by is like ADHD, autism, Down syndromes, kids with different mental and physical needs, and which is not often seen in theater arts. And so I applaud them for that focus.
So I think I'm almost completely opposite to you in this one, Melissa. They are weak for me and the public benefit side of things. And I'm open to hearing other folks' conversation around this. I had a few reasons for putting this application in the weak section on public benefit. Number one, the application did not seem to me to describe exactly how much interest had increased in the camp over the past few years. That seems to be a sort of like generalized statement that then seems to indicate that, okay, we really kind of are doing good things, and it's possible they are, it's possible they're not, I have no idea, but based on application materials, I could not tell. I needed a lot more clarity on how the summer camp musical selections were made, who sets them, how are they determined, what implication does that have as it relates to the community that they're trying to serve. And I really needed a lot more about this organization's adjacence to whiteness and how it's reckoning with that. The application claimed that, quote, while employed by the Brecksville Theater, no personal biases or opinions, including but not limited to race, religion, sex, and politics, shall be offered to any minor/theater student. And I read that and I thought, gosh, have you figured it out? Because that's really impressive if you know that that's not going to happen at all. To me, this felt like the sanitization of whiteness and a very undifferentiated understanding of how race and bias works. And then the last thing that also meant that I had to put this part of this category in the weak section is it was not clear to me how much it costs to attend. What are the percentages of students who are there for pay compared to who are on scholarships? Is that known? How many scholarships were offered? It seemed that there was just a mention of scholarships, but it wasn't, at least from what I could tell, clear as to how that was working. So for me, as a consequence, this was the weak section of public benefit.
So I'm going to come in and average both of you and come in around fair. And I just, I agree with a lot of what was just said, actually, from both of you. I want to just really emphasize that comment that you made about generalizable statements that are probably too broad. I just have these big question marks around the phrase cognizant of the special needs of the students and ways to ease those burdens. Whose burdens? What do you mean by that? The no personal biases phrase, which you already touched on. And then there was one other phrase that said first pathway into the arts for children. And I think that's a tricky statement to say unless you're going to be able to back that up with some sort of data. I would just be careful when you make statements that are that broad and based on, I think, could be based on assumptions.
Okay. For me, my comments included something along the a Seussical play might not be the best choice if you're wanting to present a diversity friendly program. I had to take into account a little bit, having worked in the arts for so long, we'd be mindful of some of these things, some of the baggage that some of these plays come along with. And but then I was able to look at their population and understand that, I may not be aware of all of that. That said, it did appear to me that there was a real effort to, and someone already mentioned accessibility for all abilities. And I thought that was very positive. And I thought that there was significant effort. What did I do with it? With regards to accessibility, further facilitated via scholarships and outreach efforts. So I thought that that was positive. So for me, they were in a mid strong.
Great. If there is no additional comments there, we can move on to the next category, which is artistic and cultural vibrancy. And Mark, you're still unmuted if you would like to jump right in here.
Darn it. No, it's absolutely fine. Let's see. So the project is designed to impact the lives of youth and encourage their appreciation of theater arts. The existing team, I'm just reading my notes literally. The existing team seems qualified, professional, and capable. The process of creating the play will be a learning experience for the youth, and it may inspire them to look at creative arts careers. So I thought that that was very positive, and I scored them in the mid-fair with that.
Again, for me, on artistic and cultural vibrancy, this was also in the weak section of the scoring criteria for me for three main reasons. One of which is already four main reasons. One of which has already been stated. One, I did not see a clear sense of mutuality or collaboration with community besides the anecdotal statement that there is more / growing interest, and it was in terms of that around co-creation. I struggled to find that. I also struggled to find evidence for principles of equity in hiring and casting being displayed. I did not personally see that. If anyone else did, feel free to jump in. Just to kind of underscore what Mark was saying about Seussical, this was a third thing for me. Seussical is a play that reifies white supremacist cultural stereotypes, and 98% of Seuss's characters were white. And then when Black characters specifically are presented in any of his works, they're characterized by anti-Blackness and white superiority motifs. So this as a piece, right, is doing in a lot of ways, I think, the opposite of what kind of ideas around how we're presenting and thinking and trying to think about kind of diversity, equity, inclusion, these kinds of concepts. Again, folks have mentioned the idea of the inclusion of folks from students from differently abled backgrounds, and so I think that is positive. But again, as a counter to that, the process of reflection to me seemed non-existent. There was just a desire to increase student numbers, and for me, that was enough. You know, there's enough pieces of evidence there to suggest that weak is the appropriate mark for me on this category.
I look to see if there are any new or differing or perspectives or comments around the artistic and cultural vibrancy before we move on to organizational capacity. Okay, let's move on to organizational capacity. And so organizational capacity is an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its projects.
I want to jump in and because this one I had, I don't know, strong feelings, but I had feelings. I scored them in a fair for this, but what was concerning to me was going, if I was looking at it correctly, from 3 FTEs to 1 was really concerning. I mean, and the roles at this point seem as though they are going to be, at least for a time, rolled into one individual. I would like to see a plan to actually kind of address that. And I also noted that while they had a robust looking board, that I didn't see any board level contributions, and that is kind of concerning as well as far as capacity. The project budget presented didn't seem necessarily unreasonable. But again, I think I had a note on here that the requested amount from CAC is a little more than half the total budget for the project. So for me, they were in a fair category for that.
Sorry. I'm just on that last thing around the numbers. Am I missing something? It looks like from what I'm seeing, the CAC request is 11,619. And the total budget they're suggesting is 29,619. So that doesn't seem quite up to half, unless I missed something.
Yes, that's what I noted too. For I scored them in terms of organizational capacity, kind of a strong, fair, but they were beginning, they listed as 20,000 as total project expense. If you roll down, it's 29. So if you go to the bottom table, it's, I feel like that's the correct, and it balances out the 50%. It wasn't matching top and bottom.
Okay, that's where I missed that then. Thank you for that.
Any additional comments around organizational capacity? Great, that concludes our time for the Brecksville Theater. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to the City Club of Cleveland in just a moment, and which will be our final application of our panel today. Great. Our next and final application for today is the City Club of Cleveland for their project titled the 2023 Authors in Conversation Series. City Club of Cleveland believes the stories nonfiction authors tell can help bring diverse voices into their community conversations and strengthen their understanding of our world and its future. This series invites these voices from history, creative nonfiction, journalism, academia, and science to the podium. They feature a minimum of 10 local and national writers throughout the year. Would someone like to get us started on how this application relates to the public benefit criteria?
I'll go. To me, it seemed I have them scored in strong for this category for public benefit. It seemed to me that there was a real and serious effort to include a variety of voices in the form of committees and forums in the planning of the project, and that there is an effort to maximize the accessibility to publics via pricing, venue, and media availability. That's what I was saying.
I had initially slated this part of the application as an upper fair. I appreciated the kind of clear relevance to community demonstrated by changes in who's receiving the opportunity to be a speaker at the forum, and also the diversity of venues for presentation I thought was great. I did have some questions though. They've stated that prices haven't changed in 4 years, but I wonder about the idea of a tiered payment model that's based on income or another demonstrated way of understanding the diversity of socioeconomic status being taken into account. That didn't seem to me, at least in terms of the specific events, aside from live streaming for free, which is a great thing, that didn't seem to me to be kind of like taken in. And it was a little bit tricky, perhaps I missed this, to quite understand what was meant by community engagement and what was meant by community partnership in a particular event. I wanted some more details about that.
I scored them as strong in this particular respect. I thought they did have a nice demonstration, or at least spoke to longstanding community partnerships. I appreciated their definition of community and how they serve them. And I thought that what Mark said about them engaging them in planning and the way that they did was very thoughtful.
Great. If there's no new, differing, or additional comments, we can move on to the next criteria, which is artistic and cultural vibrancy, which is an organization's ability to create a quality project that inspires and challenges its community.
I scored them in a low strong. They have a long-standing history since 2014. So they have the ability to move forward with this, but that when they talked about their artistic and cultural vibrancy, I understood what they were talking about, but it was very broad strokes, kind of in a way, if you're not part of arts and culture, you wouldn't grasp the micro details of what they were trying to get at. I still scored them as strong because I understood. I could read between the lines, but they didn't talk about a lot of the micro details.
In this borderline between fair and strong for me, and the main reason for that is while there is like reference and discussion of these kind of community committees that help to kind of determine what and who some speakers would be, it's not quite clear to me, and maybe perhaps I missed this, it wasn't quite clear to me if those recommendations are taken verbatim, if there's, you know, who are they filtered through, how are they filtered, what is the decision-making process that occurs. And so I think if I had just a little bit more detail about that, I'd be able to move more into the strong category. But for me, that was something that was missing.
Great. If there is no additional new or differing comments that we would like to add, we can move on to the final criteria, which is organizational capacity, which is an organization's ability to successfully plan and manage its project.
Okay, I didn't see any capacity issues, or at least nothing that jumped out at me as being particularly problematic. I thought that there is and throughout I got the sense that there was a commitment to diversity at the staff and leadership levels, and that there was an effort to involve a variety of voices. And I did feel that the budget was realistic and appropriate per the project. And so for me, they ended up with a low strong.
I was again borderline between fair and strong for a couple of reasons. I don't disagree with anything that Mark said, but I think for me, I really wanted some disaggregated data here. What do we mean by 50% POC who make up the full-time staff, and who are the 29% who are on the board of directors? Appreciative of the fact that we're at 1/3 on the board. In an organization that is purporting to really speak to kind of like the breadth of Cleveland, it should be higher. Which is in Cleveland being a city that has 50% Black residents and 13% Latinx residents. So I think that's one thing. The other thing that I was curious about that for me meant that I couldn't quite put into the strong is when we talk about 50% POC staff, or these folks who are in decision-making positions, I at least was not able to find evidence saying one way or another aside from the board that was being mentioned, or as is often the case, are these folks who are on the lowest rungs of the organizational ladder? I don't know the answer to that question. If someone else had seen something different, please feel free to correct me. But that's for me why it was on border between fair and strong.
I had them scored on the lower end of strong, and I'm not going to repeat any comments of what have been said. I just had a question. When you have such large amounts that are attributed in your budget to corporate sponsorships and foundation support, I think I just wanted a sense of how much had been secured. And maybe if I missed that again, please point that out to me. But yeah, that would have been helpful.
Great. If there's no additional comments, panelists can go ahead and submit your scores for our final application of the day, which is the City Club of Cleveland. Fantastic. So that was our last review for this session. Congrats. Thank you for amazing work, panelists. This was wonderful. And for everyone who joined as an audience member, I'd like to give each panelist a moment to share any general feedback around the process or application, and remind audience members they can do the same via the online public comment form at cacgrants.org/live. And so we're going to go in the same order we went for introductions. I'll put that back in the chat here for everyone to see, but we'll be able to run through folks' thoughts. And I'll give you a minute here to think of if you have any advice or feedback for our applicants, as well as CAC.
Melissa, I'll go first. I appreciated this panel. This was the first time I was a grant panelist. I've always been on the other side. So I can now understand more fully what my grant review panelists feel like. Feels like a hot seat because you're helping to make pretty significant decisions. What I really appreciated about the other panelists' feedback is I was able to hear new perspectives that I didn't potentially consider. And it really did open up my eyes and ears, broaden, my thoughts on different applications.
Okay, Mark Cardwell. I've done a number of these, and I enjoyed this experience in this particular panel, this group, really because of the expertise level. I'm just blown away at the quality of review. It is important that those of us who choose this path to read for grants recognize how important our roles are. And so I really just a round of applause to everybody's obviously very best effort. So happy to be a part of
it. This is probably, I've done this particular panel a number of times, and every time I learn so much from my fellow panelists. And I think every time I've always said, I wish I lived in Cleveland because there's such vibrant, amazing work happening. And I know that a lot of the grantees here are probably feeling a little nervous or feel like they've been criticized a lot. And you have to know that from this perspective, actually, I see just beautiful work and a lot of potential. And so if anything came across critically, it was really more just, oh, you can be stronger in our storytelling and really talking about what we do. And that storytelling absolutely reflects what your internal values are. And so the words that you're choosing really do tell us a lot more about what you do. So, but I really appreciate everything that y'all are doing in Cleveland and what CAC does for the region, and absolutely all the panelists here. It's been an incredible experience.
Yeah, there's so many beautiful things that have already been said. Really, really grateful for this panel. This is a lot of fun, which is not always the case on grant panels. So appreciate that's how this one went down. Really appreciate CAC for kind of convening us and making things as smooth as possible. I think the process is generally pretty smooth. I think there's kind of just two things that I would name for applicants to maybe consider. One of which is that for folks who are returning applicants, who have applied previously. So I've sat on of this panel before and have reviewed, some applications from some of these organizations in the past. And it's a challenge, I think, because one of the things that I sometimes wonder about is, are we thinking about sort of, sometimes the application questions are new, or the kind of like criteria seem like they're the same, or there's varying kind of negotiations we have to have. And so I wonder sometimes about how, we are approaching application questions as applicants with fresh eyes, right? And sort of wondering about, are we kind of using a lot of the same material? Because I feel like some things I had read previously, and it would be really great. Obviously, some stuff we can keep the same, like an organization's history or something to that effect. But there are some aspects that seem like we're kind of relying on things from the past. And I would wonder really about what are the ways in which internally over the course of a year as an applicant is kind of upholding and kind of developing the programming that they're doing, what are the ways in which they're embedding kind of like processes of reflection, which I think is a really important part of the CAC scoring criteria. So that's one thing. And then I think the second sort of thing here too is just thinking about DEI, racial equity, broadly speaking. And I think every organization, I think, can intersect with this in a different kind of way, right? And so I would encourage each organization to think through what are some of the ways in which you as an organization, based on the community you're trying to serve, the values that you hold, your staff, your board, what are the ways in which you are trying to integrate thinking around racial equity into what you do, right? In some cases, if folks are from BIPOC communities, sometimes we think, oh, well, I live this, so it's very clear, right? And actually, it might not be clear. I'm not from Cleveland. I don't know the dynamics of the racial dynamics or the community dynamics in Cleveland. And it would be helpful to know a bit more context at times to be able to have a better sense of that, right? And at the same time, for folks who are organizations that are working towards being white allies or whatever the case might be, is to really think about what is your position in community and relative to those who you're serving and those within your organization and community as well. And what does that mean for the critical self-reflection that you have to do as individuals and also as the organization? I think engaging in those processes would really bring out, in some cases, some really like deeper kind of opportunities to wonder about how to move the organization and the particular projects forward. But yeah, I just wanted to say congrats, y'all. Everybody generally crushed it. It was really fun. And I also want to move to Cleveland. So that's a good thing.
Lisa?
Actually, I appreciate all of those comments and advice to the grantees as well. I wanted to add one more thing, that just a reminder that the DEIJ journey for everybody individually and for organizations is truly a journey, and there's no really end destination, right? We're never going to get there. There is an end destination we want to vision, but just be authentic and be honest and be thoughtful, and really, as Asif said, be very critical to yourself, right? Just show a lot of self-reflection in that, but we're not expecting that there's not like some golden crown of enlightenment, right? That we're seeing, like we're really looking for authenticity and for true and genuine engagement and work in that.
Great. Is there any other final addition advice for applicants that you would all like to share before we say our goodbyes? Okay, great. Panelists, please stay in the meeting as we close the live stream shortly. But listeners, the panel continues at 1 p.m. tomorrow with our cultural heritage panel review. We'll see you there.